Thank you to everyone who's already supporting us on Patreon. We've been pleasantly surprised by how many people were able to support the podcast, given we've only been going a couple of months. We are going to come back in September, but we can't continue indefinitely unless we get more supporters. So please visit patreon.com and support the podcast today.
As socialists, we believe in that great Marxist principle, from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. And that's reflected in the 3 levels of support we've created, because we can't speak to your ability, but we can speak to our need. We're going to need you to put your money where your ears are. We have 3 packages. The Wokarati package, £3 a month plus VAT. The Prosecco Socialist, £10 a month plus VAT. And the Ultimate Comrade, £50 a month plus VAT. Bearing in mind, you don't have to be a socialist to contribute. You just have to appreciate what we're doing. All of the packages include Over the Top, Under the Radar weekly bonus episode, access to the WhatsApp private community. We had a great night on election night with our WhatsApp community. Carys and I were in there all the way through the night, and the weekly newsletter. Prosecco Socialist, £10 a month, and the Ultimate Comrade, £50 a month, also include first to know about live and in-person events. So, if you have the money and you are enjoying this podcast, please, if you can, do.
Big news, we're doing our first ever Over the Top, Under the Radar live event in September.
Spend the evening with us and a special guest in London from 7 o'clock as part of London Podcast Festival. For all of you outside London, if this goes well, hopefully we will do other events.
If you want to get tickets, you can visit kingsplace.co.uk for more information, but we'll also pin the link to our social media channels and in the show notes.
Have some fun. It will be a great event. It will also be our first event, making history.
Want to support us? Come along. We'd love to see you.
The event will be at King's Place, which is just up the road from King's Cross in London, part of a building that was my old workplace at The Guardian.
5th of September, lots of places for socialist snacks. It's an evening event. Gary, Carys, please come along. So
that
many
picture from that you sent
of you cracking up.
Yeah.
It was such genuine. We had a podcast strategy day yesterday.
Aww.
And Gary made a very immature joke, but he made himself laugh for a good 5 minutes.
I did. Yeah, no, it's utterly inappropriate. And it wasn't that kind of meeting.
Well, it kind of always is, isn't it? Hi, I'm Carys Afoko.
And I'm Gary Young. And this is Over the Top, Under the Radar.
This week we're speaking with academic, author and former independent candidate for Chingford and Woodford Green, Faiza Shaheen. Hi, and welcome to Over the Top and Under the Radar. We are here with Faiza Shaheen, who was the independent candidate for Chingford and Woodford Green, and formerly the Labour candidate for Chingford and Woodford Green. How are you doing, Faiza?
Yeah, all right.
So lots of questions we want to ask you, but I guess the first one was, how have the last few weeks been? Like, talk us through what happened.
It's been a mad couple of months. So I was running as the Labour candidate, and then all of a sudden I get an email saying that you're invited to a change of circumstance meeting with an attachment which has a list of, I think it was 14 tweets spanning 2014 till now, including things like me liking an old colleague from the New Economics Foundation running for Green Councillor in 2014, me retweeting what to boycott if you want to support Palestine, what goods to boycott again in 2015 or something. I just was like, oh, they're getting rid of me. Like, because I mean, it's been a long time coming. They will use this. It was just obvious. Online, Zoom meeting. There was 3
apparatchiks.
Yeah. And one of them never put his video on. They said he was out and about. And they said, go through each tweet and say how it's going to affect our electoral success. And I said, do you mean locally? They were like, locally and nationally. And I was like, well, I don't think me liking my friend's tweet saying he's running as a Green Council in 2014 is going to have any impact on anything. But they just, they didn't really ask any follow-up question. Like, it was just obvious that they had already decided. I emailed them and said, when are you going to let me know what's going on? And they said, tomorrow morning. And then the next day, nothing happened. Comes to 6 p.m, we've got a canvassing session. So I was like, well, I'm still the candidate, so go along start canvassing. As I get there, my phone starts blowing up that the Times is reporting that I'm going. That comes out. I start getting hit with loads of journalists calling me, and I'm there. There's loads of people that turned up that day, maybe 40 people that turned up in the middle of the week to canvass, local kids from their local school, because I'd gone in to speak to them a few weeks earlier. That sign that they briefed the press is a sign that, you know, it's over, they've made the decision.
So talk us through the decision to stand as an independent in a
I wasn't
marginal seat
with only a few weeks to go,
and a marginal seat that's held by the Tories that you've been trying to unseat Ian Duncan Donuts
for
from.
years.
Wow.
And I grew up there.
Donuts.
Oh my
That's the stage name.
Yeah, I was engulfed with emails from people locally, like really upset about what's happened and like, please run as an independent, you still have our support. And I just didn't think of anything of it. And then on the Friday, some people said, some local mums have organised a rally for you. And then also they'd selected the new candidate very quickly because they had a list of their friends that wanted to parachute into seats. And so they'd put someone in Chingford and Woodford Green that was like, just had no connection to us at all.
Chingford is where you grew up.
Yeah. And so I was kind of annoyed about that whole thing. And it was just quite obvious that they had it ready to go. And then I get to the rally. It was really emotional. There was hundreds of people there. And everyone was just like, please run as an independent, please run as an independent.
It should be noted as well that this all happens around the same time that they're coming for Diane Abbott.
Yeah,
so
exactly the same week.
There is a mood gathering and a sense of indignation gathering about the way they're treating women.
Yeah, everyone was talking about Diane and then like me basically. And of course, Diane is much bigger deal and like it's atrocious how she was treated after so many years as a Labour MP. And someone had come from her team to speak at the rally as well and just offer their support. There was just this sense amongst the crowd. It was actually this really powerful moment where there was this couple and I could see them. It was just in front of the Tesco's. People that know Hymes Park will know.
It's a big Tesco.
Yeah.
It's a good Tesco.
And I saw this couple. I'd spoken to them on the phone in 2019 and they had always voted Lib Dem or Tory and they were thinking about voting for me, but I think in the end hadn't because they didn't like Jeremy Corbyn. And then they were there and I was so surprised they were there. And I'd knocked on their door the weekend before and finally had met them in person. They're like, we spoke to you on the phone in 2019 and I knew immediately who they were. And as I was walking out, they said, not only will we support you, we'll come and canvass for you. And that was really powerful. And then I just continued to get those emails. Someone set up like a local poll asking me, 1,000 people said run as an independent. And so I just was kind of like, well, how can Labour treat not just me this way, but this community, like have utter contempt for us and put in someone that no one has any idea about. We've worked for years, even not me, like there's local councillors that they could have asked or whatever that have worked for years to make this a winnable seat for Labour and then just completely run roughshod over that and just picked their friend. And obviously lots of people were saying to me, and I'm from the Muslim community, like, I was only going to vote Labour because of you, or even then I was struggling to make that decision. So now like can definitely come and support you.
So you stood as an independent, you got around the same number of votes as the Labour candidate that was put in your place. So you both got around 12,000 votes.
12,500, yeah.
So how was that campaign? And then how did it feel to be stood on the stage, or I don't know if you were at the count and see Ian Duncan Smith win again?
Yeah, the campaign was amazing. And there was so many local people, especially local mums, I think were just so angry about the way I was treated. You know, knowing what it's like when you've just had a baby and themselves having experiences of employers basically deleting their job or whatever while they're on maternity leave and just coming out, being with me on school gates. Just so many people that got involved that said they'd never been involved before. Local young people, people that had been in the Labour Party for 65 years, left the Labour Party to support me. It felt very different in 2019. We had a really great campaign. There was a lot of people coming in from like Hackney and Walthamstow to support, whereas this time it was the majority was local people and, you know, local teachers and nurses, and it just was so special in that way. And then Ronnie O'Sullivan joined in, which was incredible, again through local connections. He lives not far from me in Woodford, and it was very joyful. It was very grassroots. It felt very hopeful and different. We did this incredible night, my just best night of politics, from one of my best nights of my life. I asked Ronnie O'Sullivan if he would come and do a pool night and people could come, you know, listen to me a bit, listen to him a bit, put their name in the hat, and he would play 3 frames against people. And we did it in this pub close to where I grew up, and the high street is completely falling apart. So it was really important for me to take the buzz there And loads of people came, and it was just such a different mix. You know, Ronnie O'Sullivan's really, really big in Pakistan, and I'm half Pakistani. And so there was loads of like British Pakistanis that came locally as well. You know, some of them were uncomfortable about being in the pub, but they like came.
Like, we'll do it for Ronnie the Rocket.
And
we'll
like,
do it.
Yeah. And it was just lovely. Like, it was just so, it was so wonderful.
Faiza, did anybody who you respect, who's close to you, say, don't stand?
Yeah, of course.
Because you'll split the vote or whatever. Or could you have stood as a Green? Or I'm just wondering what the options were. And then how you respond to that now.
Yeah. So, yeah, there's a lot of talk about that. And of course, it did play on my mind a lot and still does. But what was really obvious from our conversations on the doorstep was that a lot of the people that voted for me wouldn't have voted Labour at all. So loads of people who were really angry about the way I was treated said they were going to vote Green if I didn't stand or just write my name in. Loads of people, they'd lost the Muslim vote, and anyone that cared about Gaza had just gone, especially as I wasn't going to be there. They were not going to vote Labour anyway. And then these Tory switchers that weren't going to vote Labour because it was too much for them to go that far, but then to vote independent for a local girl, they felt, okay, yeah, we can do that. We had a higher turnout because of our campaign. So we would have got the same turnout as other places. You know, they didn't think anyone would notice if they switched me out for another brown woman.
Yeah, they used to call it postbox, just paint it red, and that there's certain constituencies.
It's never that seat.
And I think I want to fess up as I'm your friend. And I was one of the people who was, I don't think I told you not to stand, but was like, talk me through this. But my concern was just like fully for your mental health and like well-being. And I had that concern before you decided to stand again as a Labour candidate. And I guess we touched on Diane. I think one of the reasons so many women and mums felt so moved by your Newsnight interview and what happened was that like a lot of people viscerally felt that experience of discrimination and bullying. Without like going too deep, like how did it feel as like a Muslim woman, a woman of colour, a working class woman who wasn't in the Labour Party from when she was 14 and doing Labour students at uni? Like, it was pretty tough on you. Like, how do you deal with that stuff and keep going?
I think I'm still processing it a bit because everything happened so quickly and we had to make decisions under a lot of pressure. But yeah, it was really horrible when they were coming for me those days. And, you know, these people will have children. They'll know Zayan was like 15 weeks old and trying to nurse him still. And it was really horrible. Also, just to dismiss all those years of work and commitment and the fact that, so I was on the picket line this morning at my old school, the teachers are striking, and the teachers were like, it would have meant so much to our pupils to have someone that went to their school represent them, you know, and they just, I feel like angry and upset by it all, and on a personal level, of course, but also just for our community. And we were going to get rid of Ian Duncan Smith, like we were going to get rid of him. He actually said to me, it was terrible how you've been treated.
Oh, God. Man, that's the kind of sympathy you
like,
can do without.
No, but also it's like,
really?
even the Tories out. I mean, it was when
because I know we
Tories
don't agree on anything, but
I mean, they had the same with Diane. There were loads of Tories being like, well, I mean, the way they're treating Diane, and you're like, this is where we're at now.
Yeah. And then I just wonder when they see Ian Duncan Smith, like, in Parliament, like what they think, because they made that happen.
Yeah, but they will just blame you, won't they?
They'll blame me, and also, as Ed Ball said on the night, like they would think that was worth it to get rid of me because they didn't want another lefty.
But I think that's spin, you know. I think my take is with you and with Diane, they underestimated the pushback and the resistance, and I think that they, to quote someone much more of a Labour insider than me, were high on poll numbers. And there's an authoritarian streak. They lost a number of news cycles. You were on the front page of The Guardian. You had big billing on Newsnight in a 6-week period where they needed to get their message out. And, you know, to the victor, the spoils. If you win, you get to write the narrative. And maybe this was part of a grand plan. But having watched it play out, it didn't look like a particularly effective political strategy. They had to row back on Diane. They were in damage limitation mode with you. The idea that it was some sort of strategic move to have Ian Duncan Smith in Chingford and not you, like, that isn't what the plan was.
I think you overestimate their ability to learn the lessons from their mistakes.
I don't think they're reflective. I'm not saying they're going to sit, but I think that Ed Ball's line, that's just the kind of smack someone talks when, like, you fucked up.
Well,
you don't
I don't know. I was like, you know, it's been a hard graft, as you know, Carys, for a while. And actually, I do think for them, I was just seen as trouble. And so I think they were willing to take the risk. Damage. Yeah. And, you say about, they'll just blame me. I mean, there's a few things about that. The idea of just like going quiet, you should have just gone quiet and accepted it and you could have run again. I've never dreamed my whole life of being an MP. I ran, it came up, my mum passed away. It was Ian Duncan Smith. It was my home seat. Had I not got involved in 2018, I wouldn't have got involved now because, local people asked me to do it, local Labour members and then local people. And the idea of taking that kind of bullying and abuse and like public humiliation, what they tried to do to me and ruin my life and affect my ability to care for my son, that I should just take that lying down. I just wasn't brought up that way. I just wasn't. Like, you stand up for yourself, you stand up to bullies. And I'm just not the kind of person that could have, one way or another, I needed to make sure that people knew my truth and what was happening.
What lessons are there, do you think, to learn from, particularly from your campaign, but all the things that happened, your story? What lessons are there to be learned for the left and what lessons are there to be learned for Labour?
I think for Labour, they were shocked that they lost. We were there at the count. They couldn't believe that got as many votes as them. They couldn't believe it. The machinery of the Labour Party now does not respect or value communities and grassroots politics at all. They think it's pointless. Like, when I would say to London Region, I was speaking to the members about X and what we should do on X, they'd be like, why are you talking to members for? That's ridiculous. You should just talk to us. And I was like, but why would you know? And so I think for them, and they probably won't learn this lesson, is like, don't go around parachuting in someone has nothing to do with that community that turns up, doesn't even say thank you to the volunteers. Obviously don't need to say anything to me, but like, members have been working that seat for so long, acts like they turned up 5 weeks before an election and they've done all the work. Don't just upset people that way because it will have blowback. That's a lesson for them.
Respect your grassroots, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and respect the communities and think about local talent. And for the left as well, I do think there is something about, we sometimes cut corners on building that grassroots support. It's taken years to get that level of connection with people across the community. The pub owner being so happy about me coming and doing this thing with Ronnie O'Sullivan, even making that connection to Ronnie O'Sullivan. That's years of graft and connection. There's a power in that. And when you have that, it looks like running 4 weeks to an election, you can get 12,500. It's 25% of the vote. One of the things that was so beautiful that happened, and people keep saying this to me and I'm stopped continually when I walk out the house, is that I felt like I belonged in something. I felt that sense of community. That's a really powerful emotion for people to feel, especially when so many people are despondent and have turned off. I felt that a lot the last 2 years knocking on doors. I just felt like I found my people, or I just felt empowered, giving people that. We had this get together on the Sunday after the election and so many people came, even though we'd lost, but they came and they were just I just had the most incredible experience. And that's what we should be trying to create. And I'm a technical policy person, so it was amazing to be able to do that at the grassroots level.
Yeah, I want to get onto, your area of expertise. Faiza is a doctor of economics. You specialise in economic inequality, and you also wrote a book about social mobility. I wonder if you want to talk a bit about that.
Yeah, so under Labour, I actually got vetoed from doing loads of things around the book. So it was kind of disappointing I didn't get to promote it as much as I wanted to. Yeah, it was called Know Your Place, and yeah.
It's prophetic.
Yeah, prophetic title, unfortunately.
Yep. And it looked at how society, the economy, the political system is set up to actually keep people in their place, whilst they tell you that anyone can make it. And it just sort of looks through the stats and what's the likelihood of different people making it. And yeah, it was quite interesting to see, because the sales went up during all of this stuff. People were posting I really know your place. And I'm just yeah, the Labour Party wanted me to know my place. It wasn't just about my class background. It was about ideology. And that it sort of gets into that in the book. What's happened with inequality is that you have, elite interests and you have what the public wants. And what you see is, whilst people care much more about inequality now, for instance, and there is public support for things like wealth taxes, the political elites don't make those decisions because they are not driven by what the public wants. And in a small way, that's what happened to me. They didn't care about what the community wanted because they're not driven by what the community wants.
And, we've got this very diverse parliament, ethnically diverse. I think 40% of MPs are now women. So we're not actually at parity, but actually a lot of your research finds that it's quite hard for people to be socially mobile, that inequality is getting bigger. I'm thinking about your book, but also the show you did with David Harewood about Britain's first black prime minister. The sort of short version is it found it would be very hard for there to be a black prime minister because of like the class and race discrimination that black people face in the UK. So I wonder if you could talk a bit to our listeners about sort of what your research finds, because we do have these sort of visible within the political elite signs that, oh, maybe...
Is that Angela Rayner, who, you know, deserves to be congratulated, but... You know, the idea then that social mobility, look, it just shows that it happens. And by the way, she probably would have been blocked to stand. I mean, most likely would have been blocked to stand if she'd stood under this leadership, right? Yeah, so a lot of my research looked at sort of the probabilities if you're born poor, if you're born black, if you're born, you know, from particular minority groups, and how much more difficult it is. But, you know, one thing I would add to all of that research, given the last few years, is the importance of ideology. Because what have we seen from the Tory black and brown people, right? What have we seen? That if you go along with their line, and often if you're stronger than them on, you know, you kind of extra conservative or go out of your way to show that you're one of them, even in the Labour Party.
Patels and
you know,
Suella Bravermans.
But also I think there's examples of that in the Labour Party as well. Then you're okay, right? So as long as you don't vote against them on the Gaza ceasefire, you know, you're okay, even though you're probably most of the people that voted for you are very upset. And so the whole politics of representation has really shown itself up in recent years as even if those people do make it through, look at how it is. Often they're an exception that just proves the rules, but also it's because ideologically they've given up on lots of things that maybe they wouldn't have said or wouldn't have thought a few years ago, or they're willing to play into more of that mainstream ideology.
But sometimes aren't they just gits? I mean, well, you know, like we have the right to be as wrong-headed and awful as anybody else.
Yeah.
Right? And some of them are just
of
bad
course.
people with bad politics, and they want to do,
and they're the ones allowed in, and then they say, oh, look, because I did, everyone else, you know. And so it is a club, and you have to do certain things to be allowed into that club. And so, yeah, some of them are just terrible people. And like you say, of course, every community can have terrible people. And
yeah, we all have a right to have terrible politics, whatever our race. But I guess, I mean, so one of the other things that you're an expert in is what to do to tackle economic inequality. And your full-time job before you were sort of back being a candidate was working with governments that care about economic inequality and like finding policy interventions. And my guess is a lot of our listeners care about economic inequality. If you had been elected Labour MP, or if you were Prime Minister, like what could we do in the UK to deal with economic inequality if we had politicians that really cared about it?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of things. I worked with 10 governments around the world, and then we also just looked at different policies that people have done in all sorts of places over time.
I just want to stop you there, because this is the person that they thought couldn't possibly be an MP.
Well, she wasn't a high quality candidate.
That's what I said about
Worked with 10 governments around the world.
Yeah, heads of state.
It's
I would say it was particularly.
You need to polish up your CV.
It's really.
You've got some work to do.
It's strange, isn't it? Yeah.
But what is it?
Yeah. You're good, but you're no Jess Phillips.
I mean, it's it's horrible to be arrogant, isn't it? But it's just like, 7 prime ministers and presidents launched my report at the United Nations in 2021, including Jacinda Ardern and Sanchez and the then president of Costa Rica and the president of Sierra Leone.
But I think that's part of the racism and the sexism, right? Because we have to be so much better. We have to work so much harder to even be considered. There's no, so it's just like, of course you're overqualified.
I should still know my place.
How would you have even got there? And, a lot of your research looks at that for Oxbridge, for other things. It's like, if you make it against the odds and have climbed uphill, you're not above average.
No. And if you do all the hard work, it doesn't mean that you're automatically
also, you're more than
that idea that
average.
Hard work pays off. I'm sorry to say.
Yeah.
It doesn't. But okay, so if in a world where we could do something about economic inequality in the UK.
Yeah, there's loads of really interesting things. I mean, Spain's done lots of interesting things. I mean, they've just made early years education free for 2-year-olds. I mean, things like that are just an obvious thing. Like I was working with the government of Sweden as well, like they've just got loads of good policies around this. There's things that you can do on taxes, although I'm someone that thinks that you need to just change the structure of the economy and not focus purely on redistribution, but that's definitely part of it, especially with wealth. But you have to sell it. So it's something that countries were doing around the world during COVID, including countries like Uruguay, was having what they call the solidarity tax. So there's loads of comms around it about what this does for society and like building solidarity between groups. And actually, one thing you do need to do, which I would have loved to have got into had I got into Parliament, is really restricting the influence of corporates and big private interests and individual elite interests in government. So how you just cut off that tie, because otherwise you do get this massive difference.
Where they have the ear of politicians and they can like the sort of Murdochs of the world. And
Absolutely. And so the sorts of policies you can put in place to make sure that that leverage is cut. And then suddenly the politicians are going to respond much more to the people. Imagine that. So yeah, I mean, there's so many things. I did this website. If people want to check it out with my incredible team called inequalitysolutions.com. And on it, there's like just all kinds of ideas from around the world, from green new jobs in Germany to, childcare and other bits and pieces like gender equality stuff that people can have a look at. That's loads of evidence. Yeah.
I have a fun end question. What brings you joy outside of politics in your community?
Keep it clean, Faiza.
You're the one that needs to keep it clean.
Yeah, it was really hard. As soon as what brings you joy, the first thing that came to mind was like doing like community things. But obviously I have a new son and a baby and he brings me lots of joy.
He's outside the studio now, looking very cute.
Yeah, and dancing brings me joy. Music brings me joy.
What kind of music?
I mean, I'm just like, I was in my 20s and the noughties. I'm just a classic R&B.
Great choice.
Yeah.
Excellent genre. Just a bit of garage?
Yeah, a bit of garage. Definitely. We grew up on garage. Yeah. Our teen years, it was all about garage music. Yes, I do really love music and dancing and just like hanging out and cooking. Yeah.
Well, hopefully you can have a summer of dancing and cooking and being with your son and your community. Thank you so much for coming on, and like thank you as well just for how brave you've been over the last few months. It's definitely been inspiring to me, and I know it's been inspiring to a lot of people.
Thanks for listening to Over the Top, Under the Radar.
Remember to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Support the show by donating to us on Patreon. We are up against the likes of the BBC, Gary Lineker and Murdoch. We are from a small, independent, black-owned production company. So, if you like what you hear and you can spare the money, put that money where your ears are and give us a little bit.
And we'd love to hear from you. You can message us on our social media. We're at over_under_pod_ on X, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. Or you can email us at info@overunderpod.com.